The sound of a perfect gunshot rang out across the elite shooters club, bouncing off polished marble walls and echoing through the chamber like a statement of power. The crowd responded with thunderous applause, their designer watches flashing under the soft lighting, their expensive gear matching their sculpted confidence. Blake Radcliffe stood at the center of it all, lowering his custom-built Remington rifle, a proud smirk spreading across his tan face. The target had another bullseye, clean and dead center. He didn't need to check, he already knew. This was his domain, a place built for champions, heirs, and those too rich to be told no. Skill mattered here, yes, but it was woven tightly with wealth and exclusivity. Outsiders rarely entered, and if they did, they didn't last. Blake basked in the adoration of his elite peers, each dressed like action movie heroes, except their combat boots had never touched real mud, and their tactical gloves were more fashion than function. The club wasn't just a shooting range, it was a sanctuary for the powerful, a place where whispers of oil fortunes and private jets floated casually over the soft pop of high-end firearms. Blake was their golden boy, Olympic gold medalist, five-time national shooting champion, and the face of Remington's premium product line. He was legacy, talent, and privilege bundled into one swaggering man with a gleaming rifle. But that day, everything shifted. Near the club's wide oak doors, a woman stood quietly holding a worn leather purse. She didn't belong, not by the club's standards. Emma Miller, 35, wore a soft blue cardigan that had faded from too many washes and jeans that were a little too plain for the setting. Her shoes were functional, her ponytail simple, and her presence at the entrance felt like someone had plucked a librarian out of a small-town community center and dropped her into a billionaire's wargame. She looked unsure but determined. The receptionist, young, blonde, and meticulously polished, noticed her presence and offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It faltered quickly. Emma was not the sort of person they were used to greeting. "Excuse me," Emma said in a voice that was soft yet clear. "I'd like to register for today's open practice session. Membership cards only," the receptionist replied, almost instantly, looking back down at her desk. Emma didn't argue. Instead, she opened her purse and pulled out a creased envelope. "I have a day pass. It was a gift." Across the room, Blake's sharp eyes caught the exchange. He watched with mild curiosity as Emma held out her envelope, her hands steady despite the stares beginning to collect. He didn't recognize her, which meant she wasn't important. Not in this world. Blake's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Well, well," he drawled, loud enough for all to hear. "Looks like someone took a wrong turn on the way to Walmart." Laughter followed. It was cheap, cruel, and immediate. His friends, men and women dressed in tactical gear worth thousands, chuckled on cue. The mood shifted from luxury to sport. Not the shooting kind, but the mocking kind. Emma didn't respond. She kept her gaze low and walked toward the beginner's range. Her steps were quiet, deliberate. She looked out of place, yes, but not out of control. At the far end of the shooting range, she placed her purse on a shelf and carefully unwrapped a soft cloth bundle. Inside was a Glock 19. Standard, well-used, and nothing like the flashy, custom-forged weapons surrounding her. She loaded it with practiced hands. Not quick, but clean. Not flashy, but precise. Blake nudged one of his companions. $10 says she can't even hit the board." "Please," another added, snorting. "I say she fumbles the safety." Blake grinned, eyes gleaming with cruelty. "Make it 10,000. I bet she's never held a gun in her life." He sauntered over, casual as ever. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, the word ma'am coded in false politeness. "Are you sure you're in the right place? This isn't a knitting circle." Emma turned slowly to face him. Her hazel eyes were calm, unreadable. They met his gaze without fear. "I'm just here to practice," she replied. Blake let out a chuckle and leaned in closer. "Practice? This isn't a hobby club. This is for shooters. Real ones. How about a little challenge? 10 grand says you can't hit the bullseye from 50 yards. Emma hesitated, not because she was afraid, but because she wasn't sure if he was serious. "I don't have that kind of money," she said plainly. "If you win, I pay," Blake replied smoothly. "If you lose, you leave and never come back. Fair deal?" From nearby, Rebecca Johnson approached, a tall, strong woman in her early 40s. Rebecca was the club manager and a former competitive shooter herself. She didn't like what she was hearing. "Mr. Mr. Radcliffe," she said with a tight smile, "maybe we should let our guest practice in peace." Blake didn't even look at her. "Relax, Rebecca. It's just a friendly little wager." Emma looked down at her hand where a plain gold wedding band glinted under the overhead lights. She touched it briefly, twisted it once. Then she looked up. "All right," she said softly. Gasps swept through the crowd, and people started gathering, sensing the spark of a scene. Phones discreetly came out, some already recording. Blake's eyes lit up. He stepped back with a smug grin. Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, looks like we've got ourselves a show. What no one noticed, what no one thought to look for, was the sudden shift in Emma's posture. Her back straightened. Her shoulders dropped just enough to relax, just enough to balance. She held the Glock with both hands, thumbs aligned, elbows slightly bent. Her stance was firm, feet shoulder-width apart. Her breathing settled into a rhythm known only to trained marksmen. She didn't fumble, she didn't hesitate, she had done this before, but no one there knew who she really was. No one there saw the years behind her quiet demeanor. They didn't know she had once trained in secret, learned from a man who never missed. They didn't know she carried grief like a second skin, and a promise buried deep beneath every breath she took. She raised the Glock. The room fell silent. And then, she fired. 3 years before she walked into the lion's den of the elite shooters club, Emma Miller had stood at Arlington National Cemetery beneath a heavy gray sky that pressed down on her like grief made physical. The air was sharp, cold enough that the spring buds had yet to bloom, and the silence was shattered only by the crack of the honor guard's rifles, 3 bursts, loud and final, echoing through her bones. She didn't flinch. Her eyes were dry. She had already cried everything there was to cry. Instead, she stood tall, clutching the neatly folded American flag the officer had placed into her arms like a sacred burden. It was heavier than it looked, heavier than anything she'd ever carried. It was the last thing she would ever hold that had been in the same space as him. Master Chief Nathan Miller had been many things, a son, a husband, a friend. But in the world of covert operations, he had been a legend. A sniper with more confirmed kills than anyone publicly acknowledged. A ghost among shadows. His name was never spoken in news stories, his face never shown. But in the quiet circles of elite warfare, Nathan Miller was revered, feared, and respected. His spotter once said he could shoot the wings off a dragonfly in the wind. His team said he never missed. He had saved more lives than anyone would ever know. And now he was gone. The official report said it was a helicopter crash during a mission so classified even the summary was redacted. But Emma knew better. Nathan had hinted, in ways only a SEAL could, that something had gone wrong, that someone had made a choice. He had once told her, late at night with his head resting in her lap, that not every mission ended in success or survival. "We're ghosts," he had said, eyes distant, "but even ghosts can bleed." They had met in Burlington, Vermont. She was working at a small accounting firm, living a life defined by structure, balance sheets, and predictable routines. Nathan walked into her world like a storm disguised as a man, broad-shouldered, calm but intense, apologizing for spilling coffee on her in the middle of a busy cafe. She had looked up, annoyed, ready to scold him, but instead found herself caught in the pull of his eyes, storm blue, steady, and searching. 1 hour of conversation turned into 6. They talked about everything and nothing. She never expected to see him again. But he came back and kept coming back. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony with barely a dozen people, most of them his teammates. Men who said very little, observed a great deal, and treated Emma with quiet respect. She would learn later that every single one of them had killed for their country, and all of them would have died for Nathan. Marriage to a man like him wasn't easy. He was gone more than he was home. His schedule was a mystery, his missions even more so. She'd go weeks without hearing from him, only to have him appear without warning. Sometimes limping, sometimes angry, always changed. There were scars on his body she hadn't seen before, and shadows in his eyes that deepened with each return. But he loved her, fully, fiercely. When he was with her, he gave her everything he had left. He cooked, he laughed, he held her at night like she was the only thing that could keep the darkness away. And sometimes he trained her. "Not for fun," he'd say, handing her a gun with a serious expression. "Not for sport, for survival." Emma had never been afraid of firearms, but she had never thought she'd need to use one. Still, she listened. She practiced. Not just for safety, but because every time she held that Glock 19, she was holding a piece of him. He taught her how to shoot with both hands, how to breathe through the shot, how to read wind, how to count steps. He taught her how to fight with nothing but will and instinct, And most of all, he taught her how to stay calm in chaos. The loudest person in the room usually isn't the deadliest, he once told her. It's the quiet ones you have to watch. When he died, part of her died too. But something else awakened. She didn't curl into grief and fade away. She trained harder. She kept going to the range. She kept his routine. She didn't do it for vengeance. She didn't do it for closure. She did it because when she shot, she felt him beside her, correcting her stance, whispering corrections, nodding in approval. Back in the present, at the Elite Shooters Club, Blake Radcliffe still wore that smug expression, the one that had served him so well among people too polite to challenge him. But Emma wasn't here to impress anyone. Her mind wasn't in that posh room anymore. It was 3 years in the past, in the cold Vermont woods where Nathan had set up a private range just for her. It was there she had made her first 500-yard shot. It was there she had learned that silence could be louder than bravado. And it was there she had made a promise. Quiet, sacred, unshakable. I'll remember everything you taught me. I'll never let them forget who you were. And so, when she held the Glock that day at the Elite Shooters Club, she wasn't just holding a firearm, she was holding a legacy. Every part of her stance, every breath, every subtle adjustment was a tribute. And the ring on her finger wasn't just a reminder of love lost, it was a symbol of who she had become. Not a widow, not just a civilian, but someone who had walked beside a ghost and lived to carry his fire. The crowd didn't see it yet. They saw a woman in a blue cardigan, worn jeans, and old shoes. They saw someone out of place, out of her depth. But Emma had never been more in control. Because Emma Miller didn't come from money. She didn't come from fame. She came from war, from loss, from love that had been tested in fire. And now she had stepped into a world that measured worth by medals and money and brought with her something they couldn't buy, couldn't fake, and couldn't match. Experience forged in silence. Power hidden in grief. Precision born from pain. She was the ghost's widow, and she was about to remind them that even the loudest kings should fear the quiet queen. If this story touched your heart, imagine what's coming next. At HO Stories, we bring you tales that aren't just told, they're felt. Stories of strength, silence, and second chances. Subscribe to step into a world where underdogs rise, ghosts speak, and quiet hearts roar. Hit the bell icon, because every time you miss a story, you miss a spark. Drop a comment. What would you do in her place? And if you believe someone needs to hear this, share it. Don't just watch stories. Live them, feel them, pass them on. This is Ho Stories, where heroes are hidden in plain sight.